Okay, so we are in the middle of this series. It's called Crossing Over, moving on to the next level. With the people of Israel, they've been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. They've finally come to the entrance to the promised land. They're coming home, and we've seen some of the lessons they learned as they entered into the promised land. And we're looking at that because we are ourselves as a church on a journey. God has brought us to this place, and he's calling us to cross over from one morning service to two morning services. And that is both exciting. We have that sense it's an adventure, but at the same time, it's not easy. And there's, in all of us, I think, a little bit of fear, a bit of uncertainty. We're not sure what's up ahead. And so we've been looking at this series to ask the question, what can we learn from the people of God for us today? And so far, we've looked at that challenge as the next generation to be strong and courageous as we move into the future. As they crossed the Jordan, we've realized that actually we need to get our feet wet. We can't wait for God to do it all and go ahead of us. We get our feet wet and then we see him move. And then last week we looked at that ridiculous episode, really, where they breach the walls of Jericho as God overcomes this extraordinary obstacle in their path in the weirdest way you could imagine. This week, we are looking at one of my favorite passages from Joshua 14, and it's called Give Me This Hill. Give me this hill. It's our vision and gift day. But what has this old warrior Caleb got to do with the vision of St. Peter's? What's it got to do with the future God has for us? So let's have a look at chapter 14. We're going to start reading from verse 6. If you've got a Bible, there's some on either side here. Bring your own. I think that's the best way because you familiarize yourself with it. We've got words on the screen if you need it, or if you've got it on your phone, do have a look on there. Joshua 14, starting to read at verse 6. Now the people of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land, and I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people sink. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord, my God, wholeheartedly. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me on that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said." Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Hebron used to be called Kiriath Arba, after Arba, who was the greatest man among the Anakites. And then the land rested from war. What was it about Caleb that we've got something to learn from? We're going to look at four things. His faith was ardent, anchored, ambitious, and audacious. Let's look at those first few verses. Caleb's faith was ardent. This was a man who was devoted to God, just like this man is devoted to the race. He was wholehearted, single-minded. And wholeheartedness has two aspects to it. On the one hand, he knew his purpose. He has focus, he has clarity, he has lived his life with one single aim, and that aim is to take that hill. That's the land God has promised him. That is what he is there to do. Even in the face of fear and opposition. You remember 40 years previously, Numbers chapter 13 records for us that episode where the people of God come to Canaan, the land that God had promised them, and they send 12 spies in to see what the land looks like. And they report back how amazing it is. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, everything they need. It's better than they even imagined. But they can't go and take it, say 10 of the spies. Because the people in the land are just huge. They've got huge cities. The way Caleb describes it here, their hearts sank when they saw the opposition and what faced them. And so they wanted to go back. It was so terrifying that they wanted to go back to slavery in Egypt. And then 2 spies pipe up, and they give a minority report. Joshua and Caleb. And they both say, of course we can do it. We can certainly do it. Come on, we need some courage. But God has given us the land. And yet their report is rejected by the people. They're nearly stoned because the people are angry with them. And so we see this different spirit between the 10 spies who trembled in fear and Caleb and Joshua who followed God wholeheartedly. This purpose led to an allegiance to his God that he wouldn't let go of. And that was because his purpose was propelled by his passion. This is a driven man, isn't it? He is dedicated and zealous. I think he was probably quite intense. He's sold out. He's all in. Even with the passage of time, 40 years later, he's 85 years old, and still he says, I want that hill country. I'm still vigorous for the fight. I'm still up for it. I still want it. Because he followed the Lord wholeheartedly. You see, it's not just allegiance. We don't just pledge our allegiance and declare our loyalty to the Lord. It's our adoration. Friends I know have moved from London, where all their friends were, to go to North Wales, where they knew no one, where one of them didn't even speak the language, because God called them to it. They had a sense of purpose, but what drove them there was their passion. We've got friends who are living on one of the poorest estates in East London. Why are they there? Because they have a call, they have a purpose, but because they are passionate about God. Chad and Lindsay are here. They've come over from the US. They're living in northwest London in Pinner. What on earth are they doing there? They're here to see God's kingdom break in, to lead people to meet with Jesus. God has called them to that. He's given them a purpose. But what on earth have they given up everything to come here for? It's because they are passionate about Him. They've left it all behind. They have an ardent faith. Caleb's faith was ardent, but it was also anchored. Do you see how Caleb's purpose and his passion is rooted in God's promise? So in verse 6, he says, you know what the Lord said. In verse 9, he talks about how Moses swore to Caleb, where you walk will be your inheritance. That was his word from the Lord. Verse 10, he says, just as the Lord promised. Verse 12, now give me this hill that the Lord promised me that day. In verse 12, I will drive them out just as he said. It's all about the promise, and the promise gives him a new perspective. It helps him to see things differently. God has kept him alive all this time. God has prepared him for this day. So God's faithfulness in the past gives Caleb faith for the future. Now, what is God's promise to us, to you and to me, to this church, to the people of God? Well, I think there are 3 promises that each one of us can gain confidence from. Jesus' final words to his disciples, he says, go and make disciples, and surely I am with you always. It's at the end of Matthew 28. Earlier on in Matthew, he says, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome that. Do you believe that to be true, that he will build his church? And finally, I am making everything new, said the risen Jesus at the end of the Bible, at the end of the book of Revelation. There will be no more tears, no more death, no more crying, no more pain, and God will dwell with his people as he makes all things new. How do those promises make you feel? Jesus is with you now. He will build his church, and he is making all things new. It gives us hope, doesn't it? It opens up possibilities for us where perhaps there were none before. It raises our expectation. God is going to do great things. Is that exciting? Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's good. You're warming up. That's good. It's good. We're warming up. So Caleb's faith was anchored. And because it's anchored, it's also ambitious. Look at verses 10 to 16. You see, God's promise leads Caleb to a particular prayer, if you like, or petition. He makes a plea to Joshua, give me this hill. He's got this specific request. He knows what he wants. I've now listened to the audio of Tangled, which is the Disney version of Rapunzel, in our car about 4,322 times. And in that, the hero Flynn Rider is about to be beaten up by a bunch of thugs in the pub, and Rapunzel cries out, and she says, "Don't, I need him. There's something I've been dreaming about all my life, and I need his help. I want to see the lanterns." I thought that was a rubbish dream to be dreaming about all your life. What are you dreaming about? What have you been dreaming about all your life? Caleb has a vision. He wants that hill that God promised to him. You can feel his energy, can't you? You feel the vigor of this 85-year-old man. There is expectation there. Now, what fuels that? What drives him? Well, I think one of the things that drives him is he wants the hill just because it's difficult. It's the worst territory, the most challenging land in the whole of the Promised Land. It is a formidable challenge. The Anakites are there. These guys are the descendants of Anak and the Nephilim. They were giants, so they were huge, 6-8 feet guys, massive men. And the spies, when they first saw them 40 years previously, felt like grasshoppers before them. They had these large fortified cities. It was going to be attrition all the way. You were going uphill. It was an immense effort that would be needed to take this land. It was demanding. It was tough. Did that scare him? No, it motivated him. I want to do this. And then he wants that hill because he has faith. He's not an optimist. He is a believer. He trusts God's promise. In the Hebrew, verse 12 literally says there, "And perhaps the Lord will be with me." There's a maybe. Now that isn't doubt. It's a kind of expectation. But it means he's not cocky. He's not being silly. He's not taking on too much. He has confidence. And that confidence, that faith, allows him to throw himself into the task. He takes the wager. He gambles it all. He places the bet. Why? Because God is good and God has promised it to him. So Caleb has this godly ambition. It's not for his own glory, it's for the glory of God. I remember Rick Warren, the pastor of Saddleback Community Church. He's kind of America's pastor at the moment. He leads a church where there are 20,000 people there every week. He wrote The Purpose-Driven Life, which has sold more copies than any book other than the Bible, over 30 million. He's seen thousands of people become Christians, follow Jesus, get baptized. And what he said was, look, I don't just hope to do great things for God. I expect to do great things for God. Because he expects God to use him. Because God has promised that he will. That's godly ambition, isn't it? Caleb was the same. And so many people from this church have done similar things. Rachel Gardner and Romance Academy, Rachel Newman Think Twice, the medical center and the original vision for that, Mind and Soul from Will, my predecessor. They knew their hill, and they went for it. What's our hill as this church today? What's God's promise to us? What is our vision for St. Peter's? And we've been going through this process of discernment, haven't we, for the last year or so. I preached for quite some time, many of you will remember, fondly, of course, on what matters to me, what are my priorities and passions as the new vicar in place. We spent some time together over afternoon tea at the vicarage, where I heard about your passions and priorities. Over the summer, the leaders, the PCC, the church council, the staff team, and our small group leaders, we all went away for a day, and we looked at the big picture of God's vision, how he created the world, how sin brought in the forces of decreation, and how God saves us as he recreates the world. We looked at that capital vision, which is the vision of the Diocese of London for the next 5 years, and it calls us to confidence, compassion, and creativity. And then we dreamt together, and we worked on some BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. Some of them were hairier and more audacious than others, I will be honest. But we pulled our dreams together, and then we began to prioritize one with another. And then a month or so ago, following up from that, we had a staff away day, and we sensed together a vision for St. Peter's coming together. We had that push and pull, as I was describing it, between what God is laying on my own heart and what we've been discerning together as leaders, as a church. And out of that, vision is emerging. And on Monday, I shared that at the end of our PCC meeting, and where it was endorsed and affirmed. And this is it. We want to be a church large enough to change thousands of lives, create culture, and transform society across the whole of Harrow and northwest London. And I just want to spend a few moments this morning unpacking what that might look like for us. What does it mean to be a church large enough? You remember in February when we had our last gift day, we're a parish of 4,400 people. And to really influence the parish, statisticians tell us that we need between 15 and 25%. That's a church of 600 to 1,100 people. That's a regional church, a resource hub, if you like. That's not just about our own thing and what we're doing, but is resourcing the church in the region. I spoke to the bishop about this the other day, and his words were, it's a call to be a Minster church. Something that the Church of England is recognizing every town needs if we're going to re-evangelize the UK. And he wanted to resource that vision. He's investing in us. So we have not only a non-stipendiary curate, self-supporting minister, Mohan, on the team, but next year we have a stipendiary curate. The bishop's putting in £70,000. And Jason Gardner is going to be our new curate next year. That's great. Now, it's unusual for a church to get 2 curates It's a vote of confidence from the bishop. And what does that mean for us? That might mean that the second congregation that we are starting in 2 weeks' time, the third one, in fact, is just the beginning. We might need other congregations. It may mean that we go multi-site and find a new building and share services with them. It might mean that we plant churches. But it is a church large enough to do 3 things. Is a church large enough to change thousands of lives? That's what we're about. We want to make room for those who are far from God. That's the only reason that we are moving to 2 services. There are no others. We want to make room for those who are far from God. We want to welcome home prodigals. We want to say to them, come as you are. Welcome home. We want to introduce people who've never met him to Jesus. We want to reach beyond our walls, which is why we love Alpha, why Jason and others are out on the streets every month talking to people about Jesus. We're passionate about making disciples, not just converts. It's why mission trumps everything. Mission is central. It is pivotal to who we are. The church doesn't have a mission. We are the mission. You and I, every one of us, we are all missionaries. This is what theologian Graham Hill, in his book Salt, Light, and a City, said. Mission precedes, permeates, defines, confronts, evaluates, and produces the church's nature, structure, and entire life. So it's a church large enough to see thousands of lives changed. It's a church large enough to see culture created. It's a vision for the whole of life where everything is spiritual. It's because everything is and everything will be made new. Each one of us, you and I, we have a vocation. Our workplace is our front line. Culture making is our calling. And that means renewing Harrow as a whole, where St. Peter's is a cultural hub centered around a full-time cafe. It's a church large enough to see thousands of lives changed, culture created. Thirdly, society transformed. I've spoken before how the salvation of God is a cosmic salvation. It is about new creation, the renewal of all things, about human beings fully alive, thriving and flourishing. It's about the common good for everyone. It's what motivated the creation of the medical center, so it's nothing new. But imagine a medical center with a new purpose-built facility. Already, we're talking, funding might be available for that, an extraordinary door that the Lord has opened. Imagine that as a part of a wider cultural hub alongside the cafe and the church. We want to be a church large enough to change thousands of lives, create culture, and transform society right across Harrow and northwest London. That is our hill. Caleb was an ambitious man. We should be too, with a godly ambition. Lastly, 4A, he was audacious. He had an audacious faith. You see, not every Israelite was like Caleb. We can't take his response for granted. We don't just assume, hey, we see a vision and then we're all in. Faith is always contested, and it's the same with us. And the writer of Joshua contrasts Caleb with the tribes of Joseph. And in this chunk between chapters 14 and 17, where the land is being allotted, it begins with Caleb as a great example of faith. But it ends in chapter 17 with the tribes of Joseph, and they respond really differently. And they come to Joshua and they say to him, Joshua, there's loads of us, but we've only got one allocation of land. And Joshua says to them, that's no problem. There's loads of you. Go and take that land from the Canaanites. how do they respond to that? They say to him, we can't do it. They've got chariots fitted with iron. They are strong in their cities. After all they had witnessed and seen, they are still driven by fear, not faith. They still wrestle with timidity rather than the tenacity of Caleb. They still feel anxious rather than embracing the adventure that God calls them to. We could live like that. Or we could live like Caleb. And you know, Caleb manages to kind of foster this audacious culture. It's not just him as an individual. He leaves a legacy. He passes it on. So he marries his daughter to a man called Othniel, who was the son of his younger brother, Kenaz. He was a worthy husband because he accepted the challenge to go and take this city, Kiriath Sepher, gain his reward. He was also willing to stand up and be counted. And if you want to read about his daughter, well, you should see her too. Extraordinary. How can we be a Caleb culture? And I think there are 4 things that I just want to leave you with. Choose, serve, give, and invite. Choose a service that you are going to attend, the 9:30 or the 11:30. Just choose it. Get your feet wet and decide. Join a midweek group if you're not already part of one. Because the truth is, as God continues to grow us, and we've grown dramatically over the last few years, we need to go small at the same time. We need those communities around us where we are known and loved. So join a midweek group. Choose. Second, serve. Join a team and serve the rest of us. We've got some new equipment today for the cafe team. Go and have a look. Because we're doing everything we can to support you to make it as easy as it can be for you to serve. You can bless us incredibly by serving on the cafe team or the welcome team or the stewarding team. The worship team had a great band today. The media team at the back doing a fantastic job. The kids' church team. It's all hands on deck as we move from one service to 2 in the morning. We need you. So if you're not serving on a team, can I encourage you to sign up? Third thing, so we've got choose, serve, thirdly, give. Today is a vision and gift day. Because the reality is that vision costs money. And we're aiming today to raise £15,000 in one-off gifts and to increase our standing orders by 50%. That's £50,000 a year. Now all of that facilitates and enables growth. It is all about mission. That is all we are interested in. So we want a worship pastor to resource our services so that we together can encounter God and support the guys who are leading us. We want new flooring downstairs across the atrium so that people can experience the hospitality of God when they walk in. We want to create glass doors at the front so people can see in and feel drawn into the space rather than kept out. I don't know if you've ever thought, but if you go down the high street these days, a vicar said this to me once. He said, what are the only shops where you can't see right the way in through the glass? Sex shops and betting shops and churches. We don't want to be like that. We want to be open so everyone can see what's going on the inside. So it's all about mission. But how are we going to do it? Well, we need to increase the number of you who are giving by standing order. 91 of you give. And can I just say thank you so much. You enable so much to happen through your generosity. But that's probably just less than half of us. So if you're one of those others who aren't giving by standing order, can I encourage you to do so today? And there's a form on your chair that will allow you to do that. And all you need to have with you is your card, and you should be able to fill it in. But we also need to increase our level of giving. Do you know 28 people out of every one of us gives 56% of our total giving? 28 people. Most of us give less than £100 a month. Now, if we believe, as I do, that the Old Testament system of tithing gives us a good guidance and that Jesus kind of intensifies it and expects us to actually up that giving, so the 10% is a baseline for each one of us as followers of Jesus, that means that we've got an average income in the house of about £13,000. That's all. And that probably doesn't reflect reality, does it? Now, Miriam, who's been an amazing treasurer for us, has done a little bit of work around this. And she said, well, actually, for many of us, we might not know what 10% of our salary looks like. So she's outlined a few things here, and I thought you might find this really helpful. If you earn about £20,000, is that net or gross? Gross. So if you're on a gross salary of £20,000, 10% is £139 a month. If you're on £30,000 gross, 10% is £196 a month. Which one of those grabs you? If you're on £40,000 gross, it's £252 a month. If you're doing well and you're on £60,000 gross, you're on £351 for 10% a month. And if you are on £70,000, you're on £400 a month if you're hitting 10%. Does that help? I found that really helpful because I'm not great with maths. So just think, actually, maybe you're already giving, but you think, actually, I'm nowhere near that 10%. I need to kind of think about how I might begin to move towards that. So what am I asking today? In response to what God is doing, well, I think it's a one-off gift. I really encourage you, please be generous over and above your regular giving. But then if you are not giving by standing order, I'd really encourage you to do so. It just makes life so much easier for us as we try and organize and steward your money. Now, remember, that's only if you are a member here. So if you're not a member and you're a visitor, this does not apply to you at all. And if you are in debt, it does not apply to you either. Please clear your debt before you give any money. That's give. And we're going to get an opportunity to do that in a moment. The fourth thing is invite. We are doing all of this to make room for those who are far from Jesus, aren't we? We're all about letting people know because we're a movement with a message. So the website, our external signs that are coming in a couple of weeks' time, the creation of a great environment with a new screen, which will be here next week, with a little bit of painting, the new lights that have been done. They're all trying to use the money that you have given with real purpose because we want you to be confident enough to invite your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors, your families to church. Because without that, we won't grow. You are the ones who know your friends and your neighbors, your family, your colleagues. They won't come by themselves. So who have you invited recently to St. Peter's? Who are you going to invite in the next few weeks? Who are you going to invite on Alpha? Who are you going to invite to the new Sunday service? Be audacious, like Caleb. So, just to wrap up, Caleb's faith was ardent, it was anchored, it was ambitious, it was audacious. Let's create together a Caleb culture at St. Peter's. So choose. Join in with what God is doing. Serve one another by joining a team. Give. We need £15,000 today in one-off gifts. We need we'd love a 50% increase in standing orders. And invite. Invite those you know who are far from Jesus, because mission trumps everything. We want to be a church large enough to change thousands of lives, create culture, and transform society right across Harrow and northwest London. Let's together turn that vision into reality.